Here's a fun thought that I've seen pop up quite a few times over the past few months. Those critical of Nintendo are nothing more than a vocal minority. I first noticed this start making the rounds right around the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, the second we found out that it hit 3.5 million sold in 4 days. And immediately, no matter where you turned, the clear sentiment amongst the staunchest of Nintendo Switch 2 fans was that this just goes to show that the people critical of Nintendo, the people that thought the Nintendo Switch 2 was too expensive, were all part of a very vocal minority. And this same sentiment has come up over and over again, no matter what the sales metrics show, no matter what milestone was reached, as if every 10 or 15 sales was enough proof that, indeed, no matter where you turn, nobody in the world actually thought the Nintendo Switch 2 was a ripoff. On the contrary, the popular belief right now is that overwhelmingly, people think that the Nintendo Switch 2 is a great product, and people think that Nintendo is doing an excellent job. That's pretty much the belief that's been being pushed all along since June 6th until now. And, well, I can understand why many people would assume that's the case. The Switch 2 is the fastest selling console in history, and seemingly, despite the fact that it's slowed down, there's always a positive outlook from the people because anytime a console gets sold in their minds, it's proof, again, that there's nobody who actually thinks this thing is overpriced. And what this ultimately has led to is a massive discrepancy between the narratives that you see set online and the actual Nintendo Switch 2 sales numbers. And it really makes you think, because pretty much everywhere you turn online, there are just waves and waves of people that effectively hate Nintendo since the launch of the Switch 2 and want it to fail. Or at the very least, want Nintendo to be humbled prior to its success. And honestly, we can jump through the various wings of the internet and discuss this. We can analyze it and understand why exactly it seems as though the sales numbers are not an accurate reflection of the public discourse. On the most hardcore online forums leading up to the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth about criticisms towards Nintendo. Whether it's Famiboards, Resetera, GBA Temp, NeoGAF, Installbase, and even Reddit. You had a whole lot of discussions leading up to the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 where it seemed like Nintendo fans all across the board were pretty split 50-50 on how they felt going into the Nintendo Switch 2, pretty much immediately after the April Direct when all of the prices started to come forward. These discussions continued for a very long time, and immediately you can see how distraught so many people were with the announcement of all the prices. And likewise, you can see just how happy so many others were because they felt that the Nintendo Switch 2 was exactly everything that they had wanted, and because it's Nintendo, it's worth the price. The back and forth started off amicable. People were having regular discussions. It was all easygoing. But obviously, tensions get tough, people start getting way too overinvested, very emotional about this thing, and mayhem basically starts to occur. And the first sign of victory for those that supported the Nintendo Switch 2 was the day of the pre-orders. They felt because pre-orders were getting sold out, then at that point it was clear that nobody online actually disliked the Nintendo Switch 2, it was just like a small pocket of the internet. And the discourse just continued as you get closer and closer to launch, the Switch 2 launches, it breaks records, and then slowly and slowly, from forum to forum, you see more people either being shunned or quieted by moderators or outright being banned because they are bringing up discussions which would lead these moderators to say that you're doing nothing but stirring up controversy and you need to keep things on target. Basically, to put it simply, people were being banned just for being critical about the Nintendo Switch 2 and suggesting that maybe it should have sold a little bit more at launch, or maybe it shouldn't still be in stock, or even third-party support is not as good as they think, the performance is not as amazing as people were making it out to be. Whatever the criticism might be, anytime you were critical of Nintendo, people were quieting you down. And the issue is that these forums are where people that were the most passionate about Nintendo fandoms would speak the loudest. So already in these pockets of the internet, you're essentially shunned just for suggesting that the Nintendo Switch team might not be good. And it's still very much seen today, pretty much across the board. And the funny thing is, anytime something negative emerges, whether it's the performance of a third-party game that many people were very excited for, whether it's the underwhelming direct that occurred in September that everybody was overhyping and expecting so many different things to come about that pretty much nothing from it came through, whatever the news was, if it was something negative, a lot of people that felt like they were vindicated for the stuff that they were quieted about down months ago would surface again and would say, I told you this 3 or 4 months ago, Mario Kart World is not going to get a DLC, this game is not going to run at 60 frames per second, what have you, whatever the discussion might be. But the point is that whenever there's a chance for these people to come out, they'll come out and speak again, and then they quickly get silenced from the moderators once again. Now, a lot of these forums have a lot of people that are very passionate about what they talk about, very obsessed with sales data, obsessed with success at levels that most people can't fathom. But then you have some of the more open platforms. The next step upwards would probably be Reddit. Moderators can still control it a bit, but they can't control it that much. There are what seems to be like hundreds of subreddits for the Nintendo Switch or the Switch 2, and they've all kind of just become a big Switch 2 subreddit. Almost every single post that comes up on those subreddits ends up getting removed or deleted. And that's primarily because it's somebody who's critical of something about Nintendo. And these are sometimes posts by people who actually enjoy something. You know, somebody that played Bonanza and was like, I don't understand why this is a 10 out of 10. It's still a really good game, like an 8 out of 10. But that won't fly because Nintendo fans, specifically on Reddit, are very sick of a lot of the criticism. And even when they try to post something positive, when they try to say this is going to be great, as soon as that post comes down, if you're following the comments, the earliest replies are always people that are very much against the Nintendo Switch 2. So much so that almost every day or every other day, and yes, I do frequent Reddit, there are posts made by Redditors saying how much they are not enjoying the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 because there's none of that excitement that you would get normally with a new console launch. They say it feels like it's all riddled with hate, and they go back to their usual talking points saying that it's just a bunch of grifters spreading misinformation, and my name gets mentioned quite a few times, which always makes me laugh. So Reddit, while still moderated, is less moderated than what you would see in the forums, pretty much has overwhelmingly been taken over by people that dislike the Switch 2. And mind you, most of these people complaining own Switch 1s, and a lot of them are very hardcore Nintendo fans, just like myself and many of my viewers. But still, they are very much against Nintendo's pricing practices and anti-customer stuff that they're doing this generation. And then beyond that, you get to your more open-ended stuff, right? Like your 4chans, which I don't use that website, but I hear there's a lot of very weird conversations that happen over there. And your Twitters and your Blue Skies, and of course, where we all sit, your YouTubes. A lot of that Nintendo fan civil war that we saw very early on still pretty much exists in most of those spaces. But the difference is in those spaces, because it's a lot more public and less focused on Nintendo itself, the ones that are critical of Nintendo just kind of stopped caring. They've reached the point of apathy. And the only ones that you have that are really still active and still talking about it are those that want the Nintendo Switch 2 to succeed. Whether it's because they're hardcore fanboys or because they have some kind of affiliation with like a Twitch channel or a YouTube channel, and they just need that console to do well in order for their channels to take off. But even then, it's very much split, because as soon as somebody says anything positive towards Nintendo, it gets pushed back quite a bit, almost immediately. Now, I would say that after the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, leading up to maybe late July, mid-August, it very much started to seem like that a lot of people had just kind of accepted that the Switch 2 was going to be a success, and it was just time for everybody to be quiet and move on from that. It got to the point where pretty much nobody was caring about Nintendo. This was right around the time where pretty much every single Nintendo YouTuber was going on about how they were no longer getting views on their channels. People were looking for the simplest beacon of hope to hold on to, whether it was a Kirby upgrade pack or Star Wars Outlaws. Anything to stir up some kind of positive conversation about Nintendo just so they can go online and talk about how amazing the Switch 2 is. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, people that dislike the Nintendo Switch 2 also felt that the discussion had dramatically slowed down. But the difference is, I don't think we were complaining that much. And it's probably because people that dislike the Nintendo Switch 2, like myself and a few other people online, aren't necessarily as reliant on the success of the console in order for our channels to flourish or our livelihoods to get our paycheck and whatnot. Either you're a Switch 2 hater that is not a Nintendo YouTuber, so you don't care about it as much, or you're me and I'm just like, worst case scenario, I'll go back to my retrospectives or I'll just talk about something else. But even then, at that point in time, pretty much everything hyped about the Switch 2 had drifted away. I'm talking your mid-August going into September. Like, what was the biggest news at that time? A YouTuber lying about having insider information about a direct and saying that he was conducting a social experiment? Or was it other random YouTubers jumping on Twitter and YouTube and calling Nintendine a liar because they need to hate something and they can't hate Nintendo because they already made their bed? So what's the next best thing to hate on? Nintendine almost sounds like a Nintendo. Like, there really was nothing to talk about at this point in time. But then you get those September Direct rumors, and hype just starts to build up, and they got all this stuff to talk about, and every single thing's a major rumor, and people start making their assumptions and their guesses, and everything that we had talked about leading up to the launch of the Switch 2 was about to come to fruition, and we're gonna get that DLC that we were promised, and the updates, and this and that, and all the stuff, and we're gonna find out why the Switch 2 is the best console ever, and it's gonna be worth it, and there's just no more complaining, and this is it, it's time to move on. And then we get that September Direct, and it just dies. It flatlines. Nothing. Content creators get almost nothing to talk about. Everything they predicted pretty much didn't come true. And the stuff that people were happiest about is ruined either by prices or because it's just not really that popular of a discussion to have. And at that point, you got nothing. Now, for me, I had material. I was observing all of this, and I was keeping tabs about how many people would talk about regretting their Switch 2 purchase, and specifically that Direct being the last straw for them. I made a buyer's remorse video. I've had a lot of success over the past 4 months when it comes from a YouTube thing. A lot of times it was very random. Some videos would hit 100,000 views and others would hit 5,000, and I would feel like the 5,000 view video should have gotten 100,000 views and the 100,000 view video should have gotten 5,000 views. But there's only one time ever since I started my channel 5 years ago until now, or maybe it was like 4.5 years ago. But there was only one time I've ever uploaded a video and I was confident that it was going to be a resounding success. And it actually lived up to those expectations and actually exceeded those expectations. And that was with my Nintendo Switch 2 buyer's remorse video. There was so little for Nintendo YouTubers to talk about after that Nintendo Direct. And actually, I don't know why I'm saying YouTubers. This discussion, this topic, the Switch 2 buyer's remorse, was on Instagram. It was on Reddit. It was on Twitter. It was on Twitch. It was on every single podcast. Anything related to Nintendo, people were bringing up this video. And it was the only discussion worth any clicks for any of these content creators after the Direct because of how underwhelming that Nintendo Direct was and how little Nintendo provided for anybody, that a Nintendine video was the best thing for them to cling on to in order to get the clicks and have the discussions. There were people agreeing with me. There were people disagreeing with me. There were people that hated me, that gave me credit. There were people that loved me, that said, well, you know, I think this is a little bit wrong at this point, but over here, he's fine. But the most important thing is that I didn't get ratioed. My video, my topic about the Switch 2 resonated around the world. Now, you can start to argue semantics about whether or not the people that were agreeing with me actually own Switch 2s. I know I didn't, but my video was not about my feelings towards the Switch 2 buyer's remorse. It was about my acknowledgement of what so many people around me were saying and just the different conversations I was seeing online. But what I know for certain is every single person that tried to make the claim that the buyer's remorse was not real was speaking to nobody. They were pretty much irrelevant, effectively just shouting into a void. And I say this not because I think that I'm better than these people, nor do I say this because I'm trying to laugh at them. I'm saying this because I think it is a direct reflection of just how loud that supposed minority is. That over the course of the past 4 months since the Switch came out, everybody that supports the Nintendo Switch 2 has struggled. Whether it's because they want to be happy online and see just everybody cheering for Nintendo, whether it's because they have skin in the game, monetarily speaking, whether it's because they're armchair moderators that have to silence every single person that comes in and criticizes their beloved corporate overlord, or whether they have to scroll through YouTube and see another Nintendine video pop up, and for some reason it just ruins their day. But then these same people click on that video, comment on it, and then wonder why it keeps showing up for them. You're supposed to click the 3 dots and hide my channel, friend. I've been telling you this for 6 months. Here's the reality. I think there's a lot of context that people are not putting into the picture here. Since the Switch 2 was announced, since we started arguing about whether or not it would be a success, I may not be able to speak for others, but I myself had predicted that at minimum, this thing would do something like 30 to 50 million without a price drop. That was like my optimistic minimum if the thing was a failure. The issue is that Nintendo fans only understand failure as one thing, and that's the Wii U, specifically modern Nintendo fans. But if I was to ask you right now if you considered the Xbox One a success or a failure, most of you would laugh at how dumb of a question that is. If I was to ask about the Series X, even that's at like 30 plus million right now. And the other thing is, with Xbox, you have to remember that overwhelming numbers of those sales we're here in the West, specifically in English-speaking countries in the West. So we're all laughing at how much of a failure that the Xbox is, but in reality, its numbers in the regions of the discussions that we're having alone are like triple the numbers that the Wii U had worldwide, and quadrupled at least in the case of the Xbox One. That was a failure, and that was a failure in the mid-2010s. The video gaming industry has grown so much that it would actually be foolish of anybody to gauge what a success is back in the mid-2010s to what a success would be in the mid-2020s. It's night and day difference. Again, even the Xbox Series X and S consoles are at 30 million as far as we know. But because the Switch 2 had such a good opening 4 days out in the market, nobody can look beyond that. They're not considering how big the entirety of the market is in comparison to the sales that were made, as opposed to some of the previous consoles in comparison to the markets that they were released in. And they're especially ignoring just how many people actually owned the Nintendo Switch, and how many of them are either not going to buy a Switch 2 or they haven't bought a Switch 2 yet. Now, the online discourse against Xbox recently has been a lot worse, obviously. But I was a Xbox fan around the time that they introduced xCloud, and I stayed there for a few years. I ended up getting a Series X because of it. And what I knew was that despite the fact that there was overwhelmingly a negative perception of Xbox online, within the Xbox circles, there was still optimism. Again, up until very recently. Even recently, when Game Pass raised the prices, there are still people holding on to it and being like, I mean, that $30 a month is still worth it to me. Which, don't get me wrong, I think is absurd, but it's a reality. And in that case, it's a very small reality even. But the point is that the discourse online, the discussions about Xbox, the perspective this company has that the entirety of YouTube finds Microsoft and Xbox to be their dumping ground anytime they do anything bad. And mind you, Microsoft is one of the most evil companies in the world and deserves every bit of crap that they get. This is not me trying to defend them. But despite all of that, they still have all of these pro-Xbox people, but those people, because they've been through the last 10 years of Xbox, are not foolish enough to think that it's just a vocal minority going against them. Now, in the case of Nintendo, quite frankly, I have never seen such a dramatic shift around the tone of a company through my entire time following gaming. I saw a little of it start to surface in the later life of the Nintendo Switch when people started to criticize how weak it was, and coincidentally enough, most of those people that were criticizing it and got big because they were being extra negative are the ones who are waving the flag of the Switch 2, because I assumed that they were going to be the rising stars from the next generation of Nintendo. But even then, that latter half of the Switch 1 was nothing like we saw in the pre-launch window leading up to the Switch 2, and then even more so after the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2. And this is something that I do not anticipate we're going to be moving on from. I'm not saying I won't move on from it. I could get bored of this tomorrow and stop doing it. But the discourse online, the anti-Nintendo, anti-Switch 2 discourse that has happened since the Switch 2 was revealed is so ridiculously strong that amongst those 7 or so million that have bought the Switch 2, even many of them are very adamant that the purchase of the Switch 2 will be the last time their money goes directly to Nintendo. Either they bought it so they can just continue to play their Switch 1 library, or they've just basically sworn that they were only going to be buying used. And they might follow through on that, they might not. But the point is that that's what they feel right now. That's how they view it. There are so many out there that purchased a Switch 2 and will say that they want Nintendo to be humbled despite the fact that they bought the Switch 2. There are many out there that bought the Switch 2 strictly because they were afraid the price was going to be raised up later on, and they thought that it might be more difficult to grab later. My point is that even of those that went out of their way to buy this console, you can't even argue that they're part of this group of individuals that are pro-Nintendo and pro-Switch 2 specifically. I guess what I'm trying to understand is, what other fandom in the world thinks that when the entirety of the internet hates something, it's a vocal minority? Which other fandom, after 3.5 million consoles are sold, automatically assume right away that the reality is everybody loves this thing and the internet is just a tiny place where people complain? The only vocal minority that exists right now are not even the buyers of the Switch 2. They are the people that are corporate slaves to Nintendo. The bootlicker, if you will. And that's not the person that bought the Switch 2. There is a very clear distinction here. Many of the buyers of the Switch 2 are right here standing alongside us against Nintendo. It's the ones that are in denial of just how bad the public perception of Nintendo is right now. And look, the public perception of Nintendo might be good in Japan. It might be bad in Spain, but it's good in France, but it might not be good in UK, or it might be 50-50 over there, or Canada might be like it's too expensive, and then someone down in, I don't know, South Korea might like it. But what I know is that I live in the largest market in the entire world, for better or for worse. And I've been very involved and very active in the Nintendo community since prior to the launch of the Wii. And I know for damn sure that everything that I am connected to, the very large majority of those people are against the Switch 2. And really against Nintendo in general, whether it comes to their lawsuits or shutting down various fan sites and whatnot. And quite frankly, that is good enough for me. I've become the boogeyman for Nintendo fans. When my name pops up, they shudder. When my videos are shared, they cry and hide in the corner. And when my content gets clicked, they make replies and they have to find a way to monetize the wave that I've set for them. With the launch of every console, there are always a handful of YouTube stars or content creators that kind of make a name for themselves at that point in time. Ironically, at least right now, I think I've accidentally become that person. When people online think of the Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendine is the name that comes to their minds. And again, this is not something I'm proud of, and this is not something I'm bragging about, but it is a clear indication of just how people feel about this console, and how they will continue to feel about this console unless something changes. The amount of content creators that have talked about how Nintendo videos just aren't doing well anymore. The amount of content creators from Nintendo that are trying their best to jump on every single other channel and get their name made and just do anything so they can get any kind of attention and have any kind of growth. And it's all for nothing, pretty much. And again, this is not to say that my channel is going to be popping off, but I'm saying that there's a clear distaste for Nintendo, and my channel is going to die out too because eventually people are just going to stop giving a damn about this console. But all I know is that right now, in the English-speaking section of the internet, the adults from the ages of 18 to 40 on the internet, if not more, there is an overwhelming distaste for the Nintendo Switch 2 that did not exist for the Nintendo Switch 1. And if that keeps up, it may not reflect on sales now, it may not reflect on sales next week, it may not reflect on sales even towards the end of this year or leading up to next year. Even the Wii U, which failed, managed to quadruple its sales by the end of its life cycle. I have no doubt that if this all continues as is, we will be looking at the Switch 2 as one of Nintendo's worst ever consoles in their easiest ever markets. The most guaranteed tap-in that Nintendo has ever had was going into this console launch. And the expectations are going to dramatically outweigh what the reality is by the end of the Switch 2's life cycle. Again, that's if nothing changes. And that's not to say it's not going to outdo the Wii U. It's not even to say it's not going to outdo the GameCube. But for the expectations of what we thought the Switch 2 was going to pull off, and especially what Nintendo's own shareholders expected going into the launch of the Switch 2, and what they expect going forward from the Switch 2, the folks over there in Tokyo themselves are going to consider this a failure. Because while you can compare something like Nintendo to Apple, you can compare something like Nintendo to Disney, the difference is that Apple and Disney dramatically lead their industries. And they've done so for a very long time. It's almost no competition. So when they do what they do and they get away with it because of what and who they are, that happens because of how much they lead the industry. Nintendo can act like Apple and Disney as much as they like, but they absolutely do not have the same level of success and grip over the gaming industry as those two companies have over their respective industries. They will not be able to get away with it in the long run. I am certain of this.